Hello, welcome back. We have the Voigtlander Ultron 35mm f1.7 VM. This isn't actually the lens, this is just the box. Let me get the lens. Hello, yes, welcome. Matt from MrLeica.com. So today we're looking at the Voigtlander Ultron 35mm f1.7 VM mount, which basically means Leica M mount. Here I have the lens mounted on my Leica CL. And with it being a APS-C crop sensor, 35mm gives me the equivalent of 50mm. Thanks so much to Voigtlander UK who kindly supplied me with this lens to test. Also kindly sent me the 40mm f1.2 and the 50mm f1.2. I'm very fortunate that I own personally the Voigtlander 35 1.2, 35 1.4 and 35 2.5 Voigtlander lenses. So I have an idea of what each of them can do and what is their strong points. And with that said, how does this lens fit into that group of 35mm lenses? So you have the lens, obviously the body cap, flat lens hood with the Voigtlander lens cap. So I guess a good sign straight away, if the lens hood's still in the bag, probably means you may not need the lens hood. In terms of some specifications, as mentioned, this is a 35 1.7, so you've got an aperture scale from 1.7 through to f16. So the aperture scale gives you nice half stop clicks like so, and then from the front the build quality is really nice, very smooth focus ring and aperture ring. There is a very slight movement in this particular copy, but nothing to worry about. So as with some of the other Voigtlander lenses, this will focus from as close as 0.5 meters, obviously through to infinity. Obviously be aware, Leica M uses, as you know, your Leica M camera, such as my M240 I have here. The rangefinders on Leica M cameras is only calibrated to close focus distance of 0.7 meters. So you have the same issue, if you want to call it that, in terms of if you get between 0.5 meters and 0.7 meters, it may look like it's in focus through the viewfinder of your camera if you're using a rangefinder camera, and you may miss focus. So what I tend to do is, as with my other Voigtlander lenses with the same kind of design, set the distance to 0.7 meters and then walk in the focus, or walk in the photo until you see the focus, if you want to shoot as close as possible. Alternatively, you can use either the live view on the back of the camera or an EVF like I use on the hot shoe, and then you can work as close as 0.5 meters, which gives you like a really nice shallow depth of field. Because I'm typically a 50mm shooter, I use this lens almost 90% on the Leica CL. I found it too wide for my portraits as a portrait shooter on the full frame. I like to fill my frame with my portraits. That said, I did do some walkabout stuff, and you'll see some example photos coming up which are shot on full frame when they are non-model photos, and maybe a few of the model photos as well. It has a 46mm front filter thread and it weighs 238 grams. Now it's not the smallest of lenses, but equally it's not the biggest of lenses. I guess now's a good time to introduce some of the other Voigtlander lenses I have. So quite probably my most used lens on the Leica CL, if I only had one lens, would be the Voigtlander Nocturne. I'm doing this a bit cack-handed, hang on. Try again. So if I could only have one lens on the Leica CL, it would be the 35mm 1.2 Nocturne. This is the version 2. One downside of the version 2, it is a bit of a beast of a lens in like amount terms. Obviously compared to SLRs, it's still super compact. The good news is the Ultron is quite a bit smaller and quite a bit lighter than the Nocturne. I did do my homework before making the video. The new Nocturne version 3, which is smaller than this one, this is the version 2, excuse me for checking my notes, 332 grams if you bought the new one, 238 grams, so it is quite a bit lighter. It is a nice weight. It's not heavy at all, but I'll probably recap this at the end of the video. If you want a smaller lens, there are a few other options. This could get quite complicated. There are many options. I'll go back to that at the very end of the video, otherwise it's just going to turn into like a never-ending video. So you can buy the Voigtlander Ultron in black or silver. As with some of the Leica lenses, the silver costs more than the black version. The black version, £756, which if you convert it, it's around $980. If you're buying that in the UK, check out the Robert White website because it's not on Amazon. If you're buying it outside of the UK, I'd say check Amazon. And then if you're trying to buy second hand, I'll put a link to eBay in the description below. If you want to get it in silver, it's slightly more expensive, £864, which is around $1,120. So what's that? So it's over £100 more to get the silver version versus the black version. I was very happy with the black version, but I know some people like to have a lens to match their camera. And finally on specification, I did mention it at the start of the video, but this is a Leica M mount. But at this point I should probably also say there's an older version of this lens which is like a thread mount, which I've been tempted to buy myself many times for my Leica 3 cameras, Barnack Leicas. But as I understand it, the optics and the kind of the optical design of the lens was kind of totally overhauled for the M mount, and I believe the M mount is much sharper and performs better than the older version. But the older version I think is slightly smaller. However, does sometimes suffer from both haze and kind of getting loose. So I've not actually bought the vintage version as of yet. But I had looked at both the M mount and the LTM version before Voigtlander kindly gave me one to test. So it's really nice to kind of have one to share with you guys. Right, and then I guess the question you have is, how does the lens perform? That's kind of the important bit after the price. Again, I made a bit of a list. First thing you'll notice with the Ultron, if say you're used to shooting with say a Nocturne, it can be the 35 1.2, it can be the 40 1.2 or the 50 1.2. Shooting this lens wide open is completely different to the recent 40mm and 50mm that I tested. I won't kind of regurgitate what I said in those videos, but basically they're quite glowy, classic looking wide open. This is sharp wide open. I'll come on to who this is potentially best suited for at the end of the video, so stay with me. Sharp wide open, and if you want it slightly sharper, f2 I think is a tad sharper. And then if you'd like more sharpness, one benefit of stopping the lens down even more is you get even nicer sun stars. So the Voigtlander Ultron design is quite potentially unique. I've not seen it with many lenses. I have the Ultron 28mm also, and it has a similar kind of characteristic in that you can get sun stars at kind of f2.8, even maybe f2 in certain situations, f2, f2.5, kind of that kind of area, and then all the way. So in terms of sharpness, for me it was more than sharp enough at kind of f1.7 wide open for portraits, and then I stopped it down a little for kind of landscapey type stuff. But the only real reason you need to stop it down is to get even nicer sun stars. It is sharp enough at the wide apertures. It's a nice and sharp lens right from the get-go, so really useful if you're wanting to have a fast lens to use it wide open, such as say the Leica Summilux 50mm 1.4 spherical, which I mentioned many times. It's an amazing lens because you can use it wide open. I know I kind of bounce around some videos, I'll say it's boring or standard or whatever word I've used in that video. Clinical, that's probably what I said. The Summilux is clinical, but it gets the job done at f1.4, and there are not many lenses which can nail you kind of your shot at f1.4 in terms of getting what you see in front of you. The Voigtlander Ultron, I'm glad to say, is one of those lenses where it gets the job done wide open. So if you're a low light shooter, keep listening, because this is a very good lens in that regard. The colours, I'm probably not the best person to ask, being a majority black and white shooter, but I did try to shoot some colours while I was away in Poland to give you some example photos. I would say the colours are quite rich and vibrant, and they don't really need any boosting kind of post-processing. Very good colours, similar to the 40mm and 50mm from Voigtlander. Contrast to me seems good wide open, and it's only going to get better stopped down slightly. In terms of flare, as a black and white shooter, you can get the lens to flare, kind of veiling flare, if you're shooting straight at the sun or at a kind of point of light. And in black and white kind of JPEG mode, meaning I could see black and white through the viewfinder, I thought it all looked very, very beautiful and kind of aesthetically pleasing to my taste. That's in black and white. When you then get home, if you're a colour shooter, maybe beware on this point. As with the 40mm 1.2 and 50mm 1.2, you do get the kind of the crazy saturated pink flare. So do watch out for that if you are shooting colour. As I say, I was shooting on purpose directly at light sources to kind of give my images a bit of a flared look, which can be more difficult to do with modern lenses. But that's kind of the only real flare that I saw. I didn't see the flare rings like you would see on, say, a classic lens. So overall, in a standard situation, it is very kind of flare resistant, and I thought it was very good in that regard. In terms of vignetting, take the photos in this video with a pinch of salt, because all the photos have had one of my presets applied, and I think my presets have like a slight vignetting added to them because that's the look that I enjoy. However, for one photo I did take off all the preset effect, and then I just flipped it to black and white, and so this photo with a kind of on a white background, you can see there is slight vignetting at 1.7. That of course reduces as you stop the lens down. So as you stop the lens down, it's going to get sharper, more contrast, less vignetting. And then lastly, bokeh. It's not the most interesting bokeh if you're using a lot of different lenses, or especially if you're used to some vintage lenses. I quite like the kind of the quirky bokeh where you're getting in kind of maybe a bit of a swirl going on, because it's such a, I'm not sure this is the right description, but I'd say such a controlled lens, or such a technically good lens, it seems to me. I'll come on to that in a second. I would say the bokeh is pretty standard, so you're going to get kind of nice round circles. Craziness going on, it is what you see. Okay, so let me show you a few more examples, and at the same time I'll talk through who this lens may be suited to. So first up, here are some portraits. So most of these photos are shot on the Leica CL. But one thing to be aware of as a portrait shooter, I would say this lens is on the verge of being too sharp for digital portraits of female models with the lens wide open. Basically, it's too sharp at its softest setting, unless the sitter has the kind of the most perfect skin. It was kind of ripping the face off some of the models. If you enjoy skin retouching, that won't be a problem. But if, like me, you enjoy as little editing as possible, I'm not saying that's always the case, but if possible, that's what I'd do. This lens I found too sharp, so I would probably use a Nocturne lens for portraits. I had to turn my clarity slider on Lightroom right down, had to reduce the sharpness, just to kind of give the models a bit of a chance in terms of skin rendering. So do be aware that it is a sharp lens. On the flip side to that, I tend to use, I'm not sure if you've seen my videos before, my general strategy is I use the sharpest lenses on film cameras, and I'll use the softest lenses on digital cameras, and that way I get the best of both. Digital cameras need a chance to get a bit of interestingness injected into the sensor, so by putting vintage lenses which are softer and less perfect onto a digital sensor, you will hopefully get something more pleasing off the SD card. Equally, film adds the interest and the imperfections to film photos. So for that reason, because it's slightly softer, I enjoy using very sharp lenses. Again, this Summilux is a great example. So in this situation, the Ultron would be excellent to shoot film portraits for my taste, and it would be just a perfect right amount of sharpness, especially if you shoot colour film, because again, I find colour film on the edge of being too soft for me versus black and white, which I find I can get it sharp enough for my taste. So colour film with the Voigtlander Ultron would be just perfect. I have shot some colour film and I'll share it on social media, but at this time of making the video, I've not yet had time to develop the film, and I can't remember how many actually shot with the 35mm, so I didn't want to hold the whole video up for maybe months until I get a chance to develop the colour film. I guess it's worth noting for any film geeks, I shot it on Kodak movie film, which means it's even more of a kind of slow process to get the film developed, to develop my film. Right, so that's portraits. So I'd say it's not ideal for digital portraits unless you love the super sharp stuff. If you're used to, say, medium format digital and you like crazy sharp modern lenses, then of course you will love this lens. I just tend to go for something slightly softer. If you enjoy sunstars, this lens is absolutely the lens for you. I would say this lens, if I could think of an ideal situation of who it could be suited for, I would say a low light architectural photographer who enjoys sunstars. So like a cityscape style photographer. I guess it would be really good for all landscape photography, but low light, it works really well, and the ability for it to create sunstars so easily at open apertures, I think if you like your sunstars, this is definitely the lens for you. I shot some bridges and various things in Poland and kind of some night cityscapes. Let me know in the comments if you recognise the city from the photos in this video. I think that is its real strong point in terms of the type of photographer that may love this lens. And then in terms of size, what are your options? So I said earlier on in the video, I didn't want to kind of go off on a massive tangent. So let's just recap now at the end of the video. For digital portraits, I'd shoot the Nocturne 35 1.2 if we're talking 35mm. The downside of the Nocturne is it's a bigger lens and a heavier lens, but both lenses focus as close as 0.5 meters. I got back from Poland and I kind of suddenly realized I didn't complain once that I couldn't get not close enough to my subject. I always complain in my head, maybe outside of my head, that I want to be closer to the model, for example, for headshots and things. And with lenses that focus as close as 1 meter, that's a constant complaint. I didn't even consider it with this lens, with it going to 0.5 meters. This lens would be fantastic on the Leica CL, the Leica SL, the Leica SL2, like M cameras with an EVF or using live view, especially because it goes to 0.5 meters, would be my take on it. Another point about the old LTM lens, as I say, you can get the LTM version. The LTM version is completely different. It only focuses as close as 0.9 meters, and there's quite a few differences. So Nocturne 1.2 if you want close focus, more portrait friendly rendering. But what if you want a smaller lens? If you want a smaller lens but a fast lens, then I'd recommend the Nocturne 35mm f1.4, which is roughly half the size of the Ultron. So 35 1.4, 35 1.7. Softer, kind of more RTE lens, you could say. More forgiving for portraits. Super sharp. Really good when you want that crisp detail. Both have their place. And then lastly, what if you want a sharp 35mm, but you don't need the 1.7 aperture? Then you could look at the amazing Voigtlander Color Scope R 35 2.5, and that is, what's that, 2 and a bit times smaller. This is your lens if you want a walkabout lens and you live somewhere with bright conditions. Very good wide open at 2.5, and I'd say it's not quite as, surgically sharp as the Ultron. The Ultron is a very nice lens. I don't know how to word it exactly. This is this is more clinical than this. Neither of them are bad, but I'd say this one has the edge from without kind of pixel peeping. I'd say this one is slightly sharper than the Scope R, but until having this lens, I would have always said the Scope R is super sharp. I just think this maybe creates finer details in the details. I think it's sharper. I decided to do the sharpness test after recording the video. I appreciate it's probably near impossible to tell on a screen or iPhone or whatever which of those lenses is the sharpest, and it doesn't help that 2 of the lenses focus at 0.5 meters and 2 are at 0.7 meters, so I didn't test them all at the same distance, which probably isn't ideal. From looking kind of in fine detail at all the results, I'd say the Ultron is the sharpest from about f2 onwards, and it's probably as sharp as some of the other lenses at f4, so it really is quite a bit sharper. It seems to have the best micro contrast. You can really see the kind of almost the metal grain on the front of the lens, where the writing on the front of the lens is, if you zoom right in. So I'd say for anybody interested, Ultron the first, as I say, f2 onwards is amazing. And then I'd say Scope R second, from about 2.8 onwards, it's pretty good. The Nocturne 1.2 third, from around f2 onwards is pretty good, and then fourth the Nocturne 1.4. That's quite a soft lens until you stop it down compared to these other lenses. Obviously in real terms they're all amazing, and I've never noticed these lenses to be soft, but I really did notice the Ultron to be sharp. I hope that helps. I'm sorry it doesn't come across very well in the video in terms of being able to see it, but if size is your thing and you don't need the speed, check out the Scope R, still in production. So those are my 3 Voigtlander lenses, but there's actually one extra 35mm Voigtlander lens which I've not mentioned, which could be exactly what you're looking for. If you're looking for a Voigtlander Ultron, but slightly softer potentially, and a lot smaller, Voigtlander also do the Voigtlander Ultron 35mm f2 vintage line lens, also like M-mount. This is a newer lens, relatively, and it's roughly, I'd say, the size of the 35 1.4. It's a small lens and it's a light lens. Again, I did my homework, so let me just check. So let's say 238 grams. The version 3 of this is 332 grams. So for me looking down, 189 grams. And the Ultron F2, 170 grams. And to recap the price, £756. The F2 version is only £629. So there's a very strong argument to check out the F2. If you're like me, you love small lenses, and if I get to have a test that lens, I'll of course share it with you guys. So would I recommend this lens? Well, I guess one thing you could ask me, would I buy this lens? I was going to buy this lens before actually testing the lens itself, but I wanted the LTM version because I wanted to shoot it on Leica 3 cameras. Since owning the lens, I would definitely use this lens to shoot 35mm film, absolutely. But for my digital photography, I'd probably pick up the Ultron 35 1.2 because it's just a bit more softer and kind of a bit artsy, a bit more nicer bokeh, shallow depth of field at 1.2, and it's just a bit more forgiving for the portraits. So if you're a 35mm shooter, this is a really sharp lens and costs a fraction of the price compared to kind of the Leica offerings, the Summilux 35 1.4 spherical and the Summicron 35 F2 as some examples. Thank you so much to Voigtlander again for letting me test this lens to share with you guys. And if you keep your eyes out on Flickr, Instagram, things like that, I'll keep showing examples. Currently I'm putting up quite a few digital photos, and then once the film's developed, I'll also share some film examples for anybody kind of on the fence as to whether or not to buy this lens. That's all I've got for you today, so I'm a bit croaky again. Let me know in the comments if you've used this lens or you own this lens and whether or not you agree with my kind of thoughts. And good news, coming up I have a second lens from Voigtlander that they also sent me, which will be coming up in the coming weeks. If you enjoyed this video, please smash the like button and see you back here for the next video. Bye.